Hi, welcome to D&D.
Not that D&D, even though we are in a new dungeon.
I'm Eller the Disciple.
I'm Tally the Dissenter.
In honor of Halloween, we're going to talk about the spooky stuff.
Death denial. We're trying something new. We are trying a different location for our studio and a different setup and a different microphone. So we're embracing the difficulties of change.
I want to acknowledge the fact that, yes, we have these changes. It's a lot at once. There might still be changes. We've had some technical difficulties getting this off the ground. So we are adjusting as needed.
So you want to talk about what death denial means or what direction you wanted to go today?
In The Good Place, do you remember the episode where they were talking to Michael and they were trying to get him to understand what it was like to be mortal, to know that at some point this thing that you were going through was going to be over. And it kind of sent him into a complete existential crisis.
Okay, I'll think about that. Huh. So, you're saying I would be... No. Me?
And Eleanor says that it's just kind of what it's like to be human. We're all a little bit sad sometimes because we know that we're going to die and that the people that we love are going to die. And I think when I talk about death denial, I'm really coming at from the perspective of wanting a good death, wanting to have a more fulfilled life here. And for me, that really does mean, embracing the fact that this life doesn't last forever.
I like that. I did a little bit of Googling before we started on this topic, just to kind of, get a little bit of background. Just the term, the phrase, death denial, it could be interpreted a couple of different ways. I had found out that there was this book by Ernest Becker written in the 70s that basically said just what you mentioned, that as humans, we have to figure out kind of how to ignore, to some degree, our mortality. That's what helps us to be able to live. What's interesting for me is at some point in my life, I said I really don't care what happens to me when I die. I care more about what happens to me when I live. And that is what I've tried to make my life about. Now, that's saying it as someone who has lost some significant people in their life. I lost my sister. I lost my husband. I think I had lots of practice at grieving, if you will. And that practice at grieving and loss kind of helped me to get to that place.
I really only shared in one of those losses with you, and that was losing my dad. I was too young to know my aunt, but then as I've gotten older, I've seen a lot more loss. In 2015, I lost a friend to overdose. That is unfortunately all too common, especially in the United States. I am a big follower of Caitlin Doty, who has a YouTube channel as Ask a Mortician, and I also really like Adam Conover. So I was recently listening to an episode of Factually with Adam Conover. He had Caitlin Doty on from Ask a Mortician. At the end of the episode, he read a story from somebody had written to him, and they had mentioned, basically, the person who was writing said that she had seen an episode of Adam Ruins Everything where they had Caitlin Doty on, and they had talked about, making plans and dealing kind of with death and having like advance directive. And because of the episode, her and her boyfriend decided to have the conversation after they had finished watching it. And they talked and they were pretty young, so they didn't think much about it. A couple years later, he died suddenly, and she hadn't really remembered the conversation that they had. And then the boyfriend's mother came to her and said that they decided to go ahead and do natural burial, a green burial. And because she said that, it sparked her memory, and she went, oh my God, that's what he said he wanted. And his mom was so happy to know that they were doing his wishes. And there was this comfort in this that wouldn't have existed without the conversation about death. And because we are kind of programmed to ignore this, we miss these opportunities. And instead, someone dies and we might go, I don't know what to do. I don't know what they would have wanted.
So that story reminds me of a friend that I had whose husband was ill a few years before your dad passed away. And she knew that he was terminal, and she had him at home taking care of him for several years. She was retired. We were talking because her husband passed about a year later. It was after your dad had died. And we were talking about this very thing of like making the arrangements. And she said how hard it was to make the arrangements because they never talked about it, even though they knew that he was terminal and he was going to die. Like it was inevitable. Now, for all of us, it is inevitable, but it is not pressing. It is not something we live with. Like that's going to happen any day now, right? And so I told her, well, the reason it happened that we talked about it is because we had a tragedy, and that was your aunt passing away and his brother, your uncle, within 4 days of each other. And both of those were gun deaths, and just how suddenly it impacted our world. And I think of this person knowing that they were in the later years of their lives, retired, and that he had a terminal illness, and yet not able to have that difficult conversation and face that reality. And the thing is if you could face it when it doesn't feel pressing and it doesn't feel like, oh, I don't have to worry about this, right? It's so much easier, I think, than when you're dealing with a change, a loss, or not dealing.
Recently took a mental health first training through my place of employment, and they kind of talked about like how you handle a crisis and how you help people in a crisis. And it is kind of about practicing those skills while you're not dealing. And you do practice those skills. This sort of leads me into the question where I also wanted to take this conversation. Your friend, did she believe in God? Was she a Christian person? Was she religious at all?
Yes, she was. That's where I met her, was at church. Her husband had been sick since I had gone there, so I never really met him. There's another story I also want to tell, and this has to do with death denial too. And I'm hoping this is where you were planning on going anyway. But I wanted to talk a minute about grandmother passed on my dad's side of the family. That family is very fundamental Christian. Pretty much everybody's a believer. All of my aunts and uncles. And when my grandmother passed away, one of my uncles got up and said, well, we're not sad. She's in heaven. And I went, okay, it may not be death denial. I'm not, but I'm like, I'm sad because I'm going to miss her. And so I got up and I said so. So I'm going to give you layers here, so keep your list of things you're going to say. Anyway, I talked about in one of our episodes about not really believing in heaven. I do believe there is something after this life, though. And I don't know that I told this story before, but I like this story from our show that you just mentioned, The Good Place. The idea of being like a drop of water going back.
But Chidi says,
picture a wave in the ocean. You can see it, measure it, its height, the way the sunlight refracts when it passes through, and it's there, and you can see it, you know what it is, it's a wave. And then it crashes on the shore, and it's gone. But the water is still there. The wave was just a different way for the water to be for a little while. And that's one conception of death for a Buddhist. The wave returns to the ocean, where it came from, and where it's supposed to be.
And I love that. I love that story and bawl every time. So I'm trying not to get emotional.
I love that story too. And I've heard it, like other people have experienced it different ways. Like having a sense of someone being with you even. And I think that's closer to what I believe is after this life. It's in the air. It's the air I breathe. It isn't just my air. Aristotle breathed this air, Lincoln breathed this air. Many people breathe the same air over generations. I don't know where I heard that idea about the air. That brings you some humility though, because you think, I don't know. I will say when I went to Notre Dame and I sat in that space and realized there have been people that have been in this space and pray prayers. I pray for nothing I can get, but I pray for those who are less fortunate than I.
I ask for nothing, I can get by, but I know so many less lucky than I. Please help my people, the poor and downtrodden. I thought we all were the children of God.
And then to know that they have been in those spaces and breathe that air, and it connects us to our humanity. It connects us to the good in humanity and the not so good. And in some ways, I mean, we are eternal, whether we realize it or not.
Esmeralda made me a communist. I'm mostly joking. Am I? I don't know. I Let me reevaluate that phrase. I definitely know that movie was very formative when I was young. That song did have an impact on me, as well as the scene where everyone is.
You mistreat this poor boy the same way you mistreat my people. You speak of justice, yet you are cruel to those most in need of your help.
Silence!
Justice!
Yeah, that was pretty formative as a young kid. Saying that I was just like, yeah, you stand up for this stuff. Like, why is this man so cruel? Why are people so cruel? Because that whole scene is about this crowd joining in. And it's sort of the mob mentality. This feels really off topic. That's not where I was going exactly. I was kind of heading toward that place of talking about when we are so focused on what's after we die. And this is the thing that I have struggled with for a long time. It feels like I can sit in church because I've been to church many times in my life. I was raised in the church. And I have gone with you as an adult, even. I have gone with you even as an adult. My experience has been, especially like Easter Sunday, oh my gosh, it's all about, well, Jesus died for us but he rose again and defeated death. And of course you get some places that focus a bit more on he defeated death than others. But I do ask the question, okay, so you believe in Christianity. If you were to find out undeniably that Jesus did not raise from the dead, does this mean you abandon all of your morals that you say you have from this religion? Does this mean, how does this impact you? I feel like it's almost an excuse to ignore what's happening here and now because, well, heaven's going to be great when I die. And it's kind of messed up, too. It's like I have days where I'm like, man, I just, don't want to deal with this crap. And death is a sweet release from the responsibilities of capitalism, And that's not healthy, but I'm a millennial, and that's just, our default setting at this point. We've been so beaten down by this system. It feels just an excuse to say, well, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine when I'm gone. And I'm not going to think about the ramifications that will continue on. And it's not thinking about the future generations.
The Kwanzaa celebrations that we prepped for and had with some friends and family to honor that. And it's lovely. I mean, and it's actually 12 generations, if I didn't already correct that. They think I had 12 generations. At least that's the way I remember it. So, and we didn't prep this episode to be about Kwanzaa. So, but, we just love that idea and think that it's really worth attention. I do want to go back to your question, though, because I think there is a distinction between Christians who focus on what happens to you when you're dead and Christians who focus on what happens to you while you're living. That is something that shouldn't change you. What should change is, okay, so if you looked at the life of Jesus and said, hey, he died and he didn't come back. Now, I hold that in attention because I do happen to believe that he did come back. But that is not my only belief about Jesus. And so much of what I believe about Jesus and what I believe is to be followed has to do with how he lived his life, not what happened to him when he died. Because one way that you can interpret him rising, if you will, from the dead is there's something after failure. That when you lay your life on the line for justice issues, it might cost you something.
But did he really suffer or give up anything if he died and got to come back?
So the suffer, I would say yes. Okay. The dying and coming back. It's kind of back to our previous episode about, if you kill everybody's family in Job's family, can they just replace the people? So if Jesus is human and gives up his human life and then has a divine life, it's a trade-off, right? There is something that's lost. In the sense when death denial is our topic and something that we struggle with as humans, the idea that, okay, you could put yourself out there and you can have courage, you can speak truth to power, and they can kill you, but there will be something after that, is where I was going with that whole thing. Just more as a metaphor, not the literal, okay? Because again, I hold it in attention. So for someone who, for them, the Easter need to have Jesus literally resurrected, I understand that need. I do also understand that can't be the only reason that you follow Jesus, because then it's just fire insurance. Okay? If you follow Jesus for his teachings and his model of how to be a best version of human, that has merit. And so for me, I am someone that I don't focus so much on like what's going to happen when I die. I figure if I live well, my death will take care of itself. And I invite any person that's been exposed to fundamental Christianity and maybe in a stage of deconstruction or exploration, asking these questions, saying, I can still hold that tension and that possibility of Jesus being resurrected from the dead, literally, but I don't have to make it the priority of my faith.
I think the other thing I would say is if you're someone who's going through deconstruction and sort of realizing that maybe you don't have this fire insurance you thought you had, and that maybe this is all that there is, and you find that a little scary, I think that's fair. I think you should sit with that fear. You should try to feel it. I think if we want to be better versions of ourselves, we have to learn to be uncomfortable sometimes. And bravery is not the absence of fear. It's being afraid and you do it anyway. I'm a big media person. I love different types of media. I will fully admit I love the Marvel movies. I am one of those people who's not sick of them. I'm sorry. Not sorry, because I just happen to enjoy it. And I think sometimes you have this power when you are pretty much guaranteed to make money with a movie that allows you to sneak in some good messages on occasion. And I I think Age of Ultron is a pretty weak installment in the general MCU. However, I do like what Vision says to Ultron.
You're afraid
Of you.
of death. Humans are odd. They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be. But there is grace in their failings. I think you missed that.
They're doomed.
Yes. But a thing isn't beautiful because it lasts. It's a privilege to be among them.
You're unbearably naive.
Well, I was born yesterday.
The thing that makes our life meaningful, when you're looking at that nihilism, what we talked about in the last episode, is that this is what we have. And this meaning that we bring to our own lives is what makes it worthwhile at the end of the day. I want to challenge you to think, okay, if this is it, if nothing happens after I die, what can I do today to make this more like my idea of heaven? And that's something I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be a better person every day. I'm trying to learn to be better every day. But I'm also trying to see, how can I make this better after I'm gone? My ultimate goal is to leave the world better than I found it. That's why when someone is demanding silence, I might stand up and demand justice.
Well, this has been a scary topic. And I will say, we don't know what you're facing in this life right now. You may be struggling with somebody who has a health issue that is very dear to you, and you're not ready to say goodbye. That's understandable. Because in saying goodbye to them, you are also saying hello to your own mortality. And that's okay. You may also just be grieving a loss of relationship that you always hoped to have and never had. And realizing that I had to suffer that kind of a loss as well. And that is the kind of thing that you get grateful for, other relationships in your life that become sources of strength. Maybe you yourself are facing your imminent death and mortality. Maybe something is urgent and pressing. Or maybe it's not. And all of this is, oh, I hadn't thought about it. Well, it's Halloween. We did something spooky.
This, I feel like, is just scratching the surface of kind of what it means to be more death positive. And I want to encourage people who are maybe interested in this to look up Ask a Mortician, Caitlin Doty. She has a couple of books if you're a book person, or they're an audiobook if you want an audiobook. She's also been on, Factually with Adam Conover. So if you'd prefer just to listen to a podcast episode and think a little bit more about it, I think it's a good idea. I think you should also take some time. Take some time. If you feel like, for me, this is something I have had the opportunity to consume a lot of different information. I've watched a lot of videos. I've read a lot of books over the last few years. So I'm in a different place than I feel like most people would be. You're probably feeling uncomfortable. You don't want to think about it. It gives you a lot of anxiety because, there are plenty of people who have struggles with mental health. I'm somebody who also has generalized anxiety that it may be just like scary to think about, may cause a panic attack. I want to encourage you, maybe you talk with your therapist, maybe you do some journaling about the kind of anxiety that you're feeling, and try to let those kind of work through it. Use your normal coping strategies that you might use to feel better. Take some time, and in some ways, it's a bit of exposure therapy. The more frequently you think about it, talk about it with other people, the better it is. So I will share, for example, I want to be aquamated. I live in a state where it is legal to do so. It works for what I want. It's similar to cremation. However, it's less environmentally impactful. And I get to be, turned into compost if I want to be. My remains can still be used to be made into a diamond if my child wants that. And we've had those conversations. And it's kind of funny because they are 13 and they have told me they also would like to do that and be a diamond specifically. And I'm like, okay, you're not allowed to do that before I do. My child is someone with a lot of anxiety around these conversations, but we were able to have that when they were in the proper headspace. If you are somebody who says, I want people partying at my funeral, I hate to tell you this, but the funeral part, it is not about you. It is about the people who have lost you and are trying to grieve you. I think it's totally fair to say, this is what I want to have happen with my body. I hope that this thing happens, XYZ. I really like this song. I would like this, things like that. Completely fair. But don't ask people who love you, who miss you, to celebrate that you are gone, because that is so painful. It's okay. They're going to be sad. They're going to cry. It's part of the process. So please understand that.
I think it's good. I think if you are facing some of these and maybe need to have some of these difficult conversations around even like death wishes, encourage you to do that. We encourage you to do that. Whatever you're facing in the days ahead, we wish you all the love and support and strength and courage you need to do it.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like this video, subscribe, share with friends. I don't know, creep your uncle out or grandpa out and be like, here, you need to tell me what your wishes are. Mostly kidding. If you don't know, maybe it is a good thing to send to people you care about, because you can frame it in the way of, I want to know that when you die, I'm doing right by you. Again, we are rooting for you, and thank you. Bye.